Hello, welcome, please come in. Our Dark-type only runs are completed, and we arrive as ever at the summary video, where I go through the runs I just completed and talk about what happened and compare how these, often very disparate, runs went. Dark-types only was one of several suggested runs on my last summary video, and then voted on by my patrons, so thank you to my patrons. If you'd like to be able to vote on future playthroughs, consider supporting me on Patreon. And yes, I know I normally do the Patreon read at the end, and I still will here, but figured I'd get something added at the top as well for this. Shameless self-promotion aside, let's actually dive into the runs and discuss how this all went. And first up is to compare the difficulties of the different runs. As ever, this is just a comparison between the games, not saying that the runs were actually difficult, just that some runs are harder than others. And with Pokemon, it's always a bit of a toss-up. While Pokemon games have tended towards being easier as time has gone on, that's not always true. Platinum is a particular standout for difficulty and comes basically right in the middle with Gen 4. And even later games like Violet can actually be fairly difficult depending on what Pokemon are available and when. And of course, the difficulty can really vary a lot based on what mandatory trainers are required to reach and face the champion, which is going to come into full force later on. But enough preamble, let's get into our first comparison section. And I will be starting with the first game I played, Ruby. And this game is easily going to sit in the highest rank in the difficulty comparison. And it largely amounts to two broad categories of issues. First issue is, where are all the dark types? I was able to get access to Poochyena and Nuzleaf right out the gate, and then nothing for a while. It became very obvious very quickly that dark types are more a mid-game type than an early game type. Particularly this early in the series where there just weren't that many. This was one of the biggest reasons I had to use items in battle against Watson. 2 Pokemon was just not enough to deal with his beefy Magnemite and Magneton, which was compounded by how terrible Nuzleaf and Poochyena's move pool are. Having no moves that were even neutral against Watson's steel types except the very weak Rock Smash HM, it was tough. And even once I did get through the Watson fight, I still had to get through another gym to get access to my 3rd Pokemon. Once I finally got through Norman, I was able to get some more Pokemon by adding Crawdon, Sharpedo, and Absol to the group, though I did only add Absol after completing Winona's gym. But finally having a team of 6 highlighted the second big difficulty problem I ran into. Why are all these dark types physical attackers? Dark type moves are special, pre-Gen 4, yet every single dark type Pokemon has higher physical attack than special attack, for some reason. Like Nuzleaf, it's fairly close, but for others it very much is not, which means I really struggled to benefit from the same type attack bonus. And all that was made even worse by the fact that every dark type with a secondary typing also had a special typing, either grass or water. The only one that didn't was Sableye, which I couldn't get in Ruby and is just generally a weak Pokemon overall. I'm just really confused why they decided to introduce all these dark types and give them stats completely opposite of useful. It's just, then just make dark type physical. Crunch and Bite sound a lot more like physical moves than special, right? Then I wouldn't have to suffer through without Stab. I mean, that's why Absol did all his sweeping with Shadow Ball, because Ghost is a physical typing, again, for some reason. So yeah, Ruby gets to earn the top spot in difficulty, and it worked for it. Watson was functionally unbeatable without items, Flannery should have been unbeatable, but I got lucky, and the Elite Four were pretty tricky overall. And then we dive into Pokémon X, which gets to be placed last in the difficulty conversation. And there were, well, a lot of reasons why that was the case. First is the big boon that the physical special split provides. This means my stupid high-attack Pokemon can actually gain stab benefits. It's also a nice change of pace to be able to use a starter on these runs, particularly with how strong starter Pokemon tend to be. And while Greninja definitely wasn't the MVP of the party, it was certainly a top performer. This game also just had more Pokemon than prior games. This was the first generation with the Fairy type, which I had expected, or at least hoped, would make a difference in making this game more difficult, but it kind of didn't. I mean, there were Fairy types, but I don't think any were that dangerous. Like, yeah, having a whole new weakness is bad, but I always had a way to deal with them. And, of course, the true MVP of the run, Crocodile, and the stupidly overpowered Moxie ability. Monotype runs really benefit from having a single Pokemon capable of sweeping an entire enemy team. Without that, it's very easy for a single bad matchup to get your entire team destroyed. Lysander. And Crocodile's excellent secondary ground typing, combined with constant stat bonuses from Moxie, was huge, especially with Power-Up Punch to give further stat buffs. Ground is just a really good attacking type to pair with Dark, and Crocodile having good base speed and good base attack just made it very, very strong. There were a few fights that were actually a bit difficult. The first gym leader, because I only had one base form starter, the final Lysander fight because of the Mega Gyarados, and the Water Elite Four member. But I don't think I've ever seen a champion in these games get wrecked so thoroughly and so easily. And yeah, some of that was the convenient freeze, but a lot of that was just this game being pretty easy when you get set up. And even setting aside Crocodile, I had a lot of very useful secondary typings. Fire, Psychic, Poison, Water. Wow, this team is really stacked with secondary typings. Nice. And that gets me to Violet, which will of course earn the middle position. Violet has everything I could have wanted for this challenge. A huge variety of Pokemon to choose from, once I beat the first two gyms, though I do also need to remember that the base levels of Kitakami are absolutely usable right from the beginning. And of course the Terra type system is a huge boon when usable. It is really a bummer that it's so costly to change Terra typing. It really should not take 50 shards. It just makes it so grindy to change a Pokemon's Terra type. And yeah, this isn't a huge deal in a normal playthrough. But I can say adding some non-dark Terra types to my team would have been nice. I am glad the game just leaves 50 Fire Shards under Crispin's Arena at Blueberry Academy. Fire is just such a good attacking type. And specifically for this run, it was also very useful defensively. I don't know why Fire resists Fairy, but I do appreciate it. And the versatility and the sheer number of Pokemon I could use, combined with the most expansive move pools these Pokemon have ever seen, really makes this a lot easier than it probably should have been. It wasn't a complete joke, but it was mostly a joke. And then of course, the completely busted friendship mechanics. King Gambit nearly soloed Nemona's entire team entirely because of affection, which was incredibly funny, but also a bit of a letdown. I mean, realistically, I would have just led with Zoroark, done a nasty plot or two, and solo swept her that way, but still, it could have been a bit more interesting. That being said, it does still fall a bit shy of the easiest ranking just because of how easy X was. Though I don't use a Moxie Sweeper in Violet, so maybe that could have made me change my mind. Oh well, Violet gets to be middle. And next up is the recommendations section, where I will rank these games in the order I would recommend them. And I will of course be starting with Ruby, and Ruby gets to get slotted into the middle position, for a variety of reasons. Ruby does have a lot going for it. First off is the difficulty. Ruby actually manages to be pretty tricky throughout, and yeah, a lot of that is the weird design decisions they made with these dark types, but even ignoring that, the gym leaders in this game are pretty interesting fights. Honestly, I think the gym leaders in Ruby are better than either of the other games. And the Pokemon you can get in this run are really interesting. Absol is a pretty good normal physical sweeper, Nuzleaf is a weird mixed attacker with grass moves to deal damage and heal, and Cacturne is a criminal. Seriously, who thought it was smart to give one Pokemon Leech Seed, Ingrain, and Sand Attack? It's so funny. However, the reason this run isn't in the top spot is because every playthrough is going to be very similar. Because surprise, there are only 6 dark types you can get in a playthrough of Ruby, and I used them all. So, while your moves and strategies may be a bit different, particularly if you know this game better than I do, and yeah, I also have no idea how or even if you can beat Watson without being absurdly lucky with accuracy drops, using items, or breaking the level cap. Having a Magnemite that spams Thunder Wave that early in the game is frankly just a really rude thing to do, and I don't appreciate it. And next up is Pokémon X, which I will ultimately slide into last place on my recommendation listing. Don't get me wrong, I did have a lot of fun with this playthrough, and it definitely wasn't a bad time, but X ultimately has to be dropped in last place for a few reasons. Reason the first is that it's honestly a bit too easy. Even limiting to dark types, this game just isn't that difficult. I mean, a few of the Serena fights were interesting, and the last Lysander fight was actually a loss. Then again, when I came back with my full team and knowing what Pokemon he'd have, I absolutely destroyed him. And I can't really think of any gym leaders or Elite Four that were actually difficult other than the Water type Elite Four member. I mean, this gym had a Fighting type and a Fairy type, and neither were even remotely challenging. Honestly, the Water type Elite Four member being the hardest is really weird. Water and Dark type don't even have a type interaction whatsoever. And my team was only a bit weak to Water. Huh, that is actually a bit strange. But yeah, this run was just really easy. Like, too easy. But while it is in last place in this ranking, it was still a fun run. While the Pokemon you have access to early on are pretty limited, you can end up with a really diverse team. There were a lot of Dark types, too many for me to use in a playthrough, and that does always get extra points in the recommendation section. Because if the only option is to do exactly what I did, well then you're just playing the exact same run. whereas in X, you have actual choices about which Pokemon you should use. And this edges it really close to Ruby, which does not have that benefit, but it still falls just a bit short. Oh well, it was a good playthrough. And last, but obviously not least, is Violet, which earns the top spot. Which, honestly, I think it always has. Part of this is all the things that Violet does right as the most modern Pokemon game. Part of it is that it is comparatively streamlined, and there are just so many Pokemon you can get access to, and so many moves you can teach them. I got a lot of Pokemon that I just didn't end up using. Observant viewers may have noticed that during the run, I actually divided my box of dark types into 2 sections. One section of dark types I probably wasn't going to use or had already used as much as I cared to, and another section of Pokemon that weren't quite ready to use because I was waiting until I could evolve them, and then the actual Pokemon in my party that I was currently using. Violet does suffer a bit in that it can be a bit tedious to get up to level and really maximize your Pokemon. I'm playing this on modern hardware where cheating in rare candies isn't a thing, so I have to actually get experience legitimately. And the other ways you can optimize your Pokemon just aren't really feasible. From a game design perspective, I love the crafting TMs from Pokemon parts to get you to explore and encounter all the Pokemon Paldea has to offer. I like it less when it makes actually crafting TMs a pain in the butt for challenge run purposes. And again, whoever decided changing Terra type should take 50 shards is a criminal. But other than that, Violet just really has everything you would want. Unless you wanted a good frame rate. In that case, we are actually on a diet. Oof. And while X had a decent number of Pokemon to choose from, Violet is overflowing with options. More than I even bothered to catch. So if you want to do a Dark-type only playthrough, I recommend it. You can even use completely different Pokemon. Use a Mandibuzz, use a Crawdaunt, use a third Pokemon I didn't use that I didn't bother looking up while finishing this script. And beyond that, there's a lot of game I just didn't do. I don't really bother with the Titans or the Star Bases. They are very much their own thing and very separate from the consistent gym quest in Pokemon. And that's not to say anything about the dive into Area Zero for the endgame. So, use whatever Pokemon you want and be as completionist in the story as you want to be. It will be a pretty fun time with some nice variety. And that is Dark Types Only completed. A few runs down, the summary done. And that was a fun time. Dark types are honestly pretty consistent across the different Pokemon generations. Always a pretty good mid-tier type who generally specializes in physical attack. I'll be curious to see what my next Pokemon Challenge series looks like. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.